The ice stretched out as far as the eye could see, a barren wasteland where survival was measured in heartbeats. Captain Ronan Briggs crouched low behind a jagged ridge, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. His heartbeat was steady, his eyes scanning the horizon. His enemies were close, too close. A shiver ran through him, but it wasn't the cold, it was the tension of waiting. His hands tightened on the makeshift weapon he'd fashioned from scrap metal. On this prison planet, weapons were hard to come by, and anything could be a tool of survival. Across the frozen expanse, alien figures began to appear. They moved slowly, cautiously, their eyes fixed on the spot where Ronan had hidden himself. Among them, the towering figure of Captain Zarek, an imposing alien with deep crimson skin and glowing yellow eyes, stood out. His gang followed closely, their sharp claws and jagged weapons gleaming under the pale light of the distant star. "They think I'm weak," Ronan muttered under his breath, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. His fingers twitched with anticipation. He had learned the hard way that out here, strength wasn't just about muscle or numbers. It was about outsmarting your enemy. And humans were very good at that. Zarek stopped a few meters away, his glowing eyes scanning the area. Behind him was Mira, her green skin blending into the ice, her sharp eyes watching Ronan's hideout. She had been human once, born on Earth, but raised by alien sympathizers. Her loyalty now belonged to Zarek, though deep down she still held a flicker of doubt about her place in the galaxy. "Bring him out," Zarek growled, his voice like the rumble of distant thunder. Two of his men moved forward, armed with plasma rifles. They stepped carefully, their heavy boots crunching in the snow. But Ronan was faster. In one swift movement, he lunged from his hiding place, swinging the metal shard with deadly precision. The nearest alien dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the ground. The second alien stumbled, eyes wide with shock, as Ronan knocked him unconscious with a brutal strike to the head. "Humans are weak, huh?" Ronan muttered as he grabbed the plasma rifle from the fallen guard. His muscles tensed as he pointed it at Zarek. Zarek's lips curled into a sneer. "You've just delayed the inevitable. We scanned your kind, human. You're not built for this world." Mira stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "Your body heat is an asset here, Ronan, but it won't last. Once we're done with you, we'll drain every ounce of warmth from you to power our machines." Ronan felt the cold bite deeper into his bones, but he refused to let it show. He had been through worse. As a former military officer on Earth, he'd faced hostile environments before, but nothing compared to this frozen wasteland, and nothing compared to the alien technology he had encountered in his time here. They were wrong about humans, and they were about to find out just how wrong. "You think you know everything about humans." Ronan's voice was steady, but his gaze was hard. "You don't know half of it." Zarek chuckled, his yellow eyes gleaming. "We know enough. We scanned you when you first arrived. Weak musculature, low resistance to the cold, fragile bones compared to our kind. You are nothing more than a temporary solution to a permanent problem." Ronan tightened his grip on the plasma rifle. "That's where you're wrong, Zarek. You've only scanned the surface." Before Zarek could respond, Ronan fired a shot directly at his feet, sending a burst of ice and snow into the air. The sudden movement caused Zarek to flinch, a rare moment of hesitation from the ruthless gang leader. In that split second, Ronan bolted, disappearing into the snowy terrain like a shadow. After him, Zarek roared, his voice echoing through the icy plains. Mira hesitated for a moment, her eyes following Ronan's retreating figure. Something stirred in her, a small, nagging thought that she couldn't shake. Maybe Zarek was wrong. Maybe humans weren't as weak as they seemed. But now wasn't the time for doubt. She turned to follow the rest of Zarek's men, her decision made. Ronan ran, his heart pounding in his chest. The cold burned his lungs, and the snow crunched beneath his boots. He had memorized this part of the planet well, its ridges, its valleys, and the hidden caves where he could take shelter. But Zarek's gang wasn't far behind. As he reached a narrow crevasse, Ronan slipped into the shadows, pressing himself against the icy wall. His breath came in ragged gasps as he waited for the sound of footsteps to pass. His mind raced, replaying Zarek's words. They scanned me, but they don't know everything. The cold may have been his enemy, but his human body had adapted in ways the aliens could never understand. His heat-regulating ability was just one of the many enhancements humans had developed after centuries of space exploration. His body wasn't as fragile as Zarek believed, and that gave him an edge. The sound of footsteps grew distant, and Ronan allowed himself a moment to breathe. He wasn't out of danger yet, but he had bought himself some time. And in this frozen wasteland, time was a valuable weapon. As the wind howled through the crevasse, Ronan tightened his grip on the plasma rifle. Zarek and his men had underestimated him, and that was their biggest mistake. Part 2 would reveal how Ronan's heat-based survival ability becomes the focal point of his escape, and Zarek's growing obsession with capturing him. Ronan pressed his back against the icy wall of the crevasse, listening carefully as the alien gang passed by. Their footsteps were loud, crunching through the snow, but they didn't stop. Zarek's roars of frustration echoed in the distance, but Ronan wasn't worried, not yet. His heart still raced, but now the cold didn't seem so unbearable. His body had begun to regulate its temperature, generating warmth to counter the freezing environment. It was something his enemies couldn't understand, something even Ronan didn't fully comprehend. All he knew was that it gave him a chance. Above him, Zarek's lieutenant, Harkon, a reptilian alien with long talons and an armored tail, shouted orders to the rest of the gang. Harkon was Zarek's enforcer, always eager for a fight and even more eager to spill blood. His voice carried easily over the howling wind. He can't have gone far, spread out. When we find him, the captain wants him alive. For now. Ronan clenched his jaw. He had no intention of being captured again. He scanned the narrow path ahead of him, his breath steadying. There was a small cave up ahead, just out of sight. If he could make it there, he could buy more time to come up with a plan. He waited until the last of Zarek's men disappeared over the ridge, then moved quickly and quietly. His body was still stiff from the cold, but it responded better now, the heat radiating from his core warming his muscles. The cave was barely large enough for him to crawl through, but it would have to do. As he slipped inside, he heard a rustling behind him. Turning, he saw Mira standing at the entrance, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Thought you'd lost me," she asked, her voice low. Ronan didn't flinch. He held the plasma rifle at his side, ready but not threatening. "You're not like the others," he said quietly, studying her. "You didn't come here to kill me." Mira stepped into the cave, her movements fluid and graceful. She stood close enough for Ronan to see the uncertainty in her eyes, though she tried to mask it. "You think you know me?" she asked, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "I know you're questioning your loyalty to Zarek," Ronan replied, "and I know you've seen enough to realize humans aren't as weak as he thinks." Mira's eyes narrowed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she glanced at the rifle in Ronan's hand, then back at his face. "You're right about one thing," she said. "I didn't come here to kill you. But that doesn't mean I'm here to help you, either." Ronan shrugged. "You'll have to choose eventually. Zarek won't stop until he drains every bit of heat from me. You've seen what he does to prisoners, to anyone who stands in his way." Mira's gaze flickered for a moment, a crack in her composure. She had seen the way Zarek treated his enemies, and even his own men. There were no limits to his cruelty, especially when survival was on the line, but that wasn't what bothered her now. "He scanned you, didn't he?" she asked, stepping closer. "When you were captured before, he scanned you and found something." Ronan's expression darkened. Yeah, he found something he didn't expect. Mira's curiosity flared, despite her efforts to suppress it. What did he find? Ronan sighed and leaned back against the cave wall, the cold stone biting into his skin. "Humans have evolved, Mira. Out here in space, in hostile environments like this, We've had to adapt. My body can regulate heat, generate it when I need it. That's why Zarek wants me so badly. To him, I'm a walking furnace. Mira looked stunned for a moment, but then her expression shifted to something more calculating. If that's true, then why haven't you used it to escape? I'm using it right now, Ronan replied, but it comes with a cost. The more heat I generate, the more strain it puts on my body. If I push too hard, I'll burn myself out, literally. Mira's eyes widened slightly as she began to understand the delicate balance Ronan had to maintain. So, you can't just melt your way out of this prison planet. You need time. Ronan nodded. Exactly. And that's what Zarek doesn't get. He thinks he can just hook me up to one of his machines and extract my heat endlessly. But if he pushes me too far, I'll die before he gets what he wants. Mira crossed her arms, her mind racing. She had never seen a human like Ronan before, someone who could survive in conditions that would kill most others. It made her wonder what else humans were capable of. But more than that, it made her question her loyalty to Zarek. He's going to keep coming after you, Mira said softly, no matter how far you run. Ronan smirked. I'm counting on it. The longer he chases me, the more time I have to figure out how to take him down. Mira was silent for a long moment, her eyes locked on Ronan's. Then slowly she nodded. If you want to survive, you're going to need help. Ronan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her sudden shift. And you're offering? Mira shrugged, her expression unreadable. Let's just say I'm not a fan of Zarek's methods. If you can promise me one thing, I'll help you. Ronan tilted his head. And what's that? Mira's gaze hardened. When this is over, you make sure Zarek doesn't walk away from it. Ronan's smirk returned. I can promise you that. Without another word, Mira turned and started to leave the cave, but she paused at the entrance. We should move quickly. Zarek's men won't stay off your trail for long. Ronan stood up, feeling the warmth return to his limbs. Then let's give them something to chase. As they stepped out of the cave, the icy wind hit them again, but this time Ronan was ready. With Mira by his side, they would make Zarek regret ever underestimating humans. Ronan and Mira moved quickly through the frozen wasteland, their figures barely visible against the white expanse. The wind howled around them, cutting through their clothing like knives, but Ronan's body was holding up better than Mira's, thanks to his heat regulation ability. He glanced at her, noticing her slowing steps, her breath becoming labored in the freezing cold. We need to find shelter, Ronan said, his voice barely audible over the wind. You won't last much longer out here. Mira shook her head, stubbornly pushing forward. I've survived worse. We're almost there. Ronan wasn't convinced. He had seen what this planet could do to even the strongest beings. The ice didn't care about resilience. It wore you down until you had nothing left. But he admired her determination. She had made her choice to join him, and now they were in this together. Ahead of them, the icy terrain sloped down into a valley where sharp ridges and jagged rocks jutted out from the snow. It wasn't much, but it would offer some protection from the biting wind. Ronan led the way, picking out a path through the rocks until they reached a narrow crevasse. This way, he said, gesturing for Mira to follow. The crevasse opened up into a small cave, its entrance hidden from view by the rocks above. Inside, the air was slightly warmer, the wind blocked by the natural walls of ice. It wasn't much, but it would give them a moment to rest and plan. Mira collapsed onto the icy ground, her body shivering uncontrollably. Ronan knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His own body radiated warmth, and he focused, channeling more heat to his core. Slowly, Mira's shivers began to subside as his warmth spread to her. How are you doing that? She asked through chattering teeth. Ronan shrugged. I told you. Humans have evolved, adapted to survive in places like this. Mira shook her head, still amazed. I've never seen anything like it. You haven't seen the half of it, Ronan said with a wry smile. We've been underestimated for centuries. Aliens like Zarek think they got us figured out, but they don't know what we're capable of. Mira looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and something else, respect. You really think we can beat him? Ronan's smile faded. I know we can, but it won't be easy. Zarek's got the numbers, and he's got the tech. We've got me. And me, Mira added, sitting up straighter. Ronan chuckled. Yeah, you too. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the soft whistling of the wind outside the cave. Then Mira spoke again, her voice more serious. You've got a plan, don't you? Ronan nodded. I always have a plan. But first, we need to figure out where Zarek's keeping his tech. He's got machines that can drain heat from living beings. That's what he wants me for. If we can destroy those machines, we take away his biggest advantage. Mira frowned, thinking. He keeps most of his tech in the central hub, near the thermal core. It's heavily guarded, but if we can get in, we might have a shot. Ronan's mind raced, piecing together a strategy. The central hub would be the key. Not only would it house the machines Zarek used to drain heat, but it would also be the heart of his operations. If they could take it out, it would cripple Zarek's entire gang. We'll need a distraction, Ronan said, standing up and pacing. Something big enough to draw his men away from the hub. Once they're distracted, we sneak in and sabotage the machines. Mira looked up at him. What kind of distraction? Ronan smirked. You'll see. The two of them rested for a few more minutes, gathering their strength. Then, without another word, they set off again. This time, they moved with purpose, heading toward the central hub. The journey was treacherous, the icy winds nearly knocking them off their feet at times, but they pressed on. As they approached the outskirts of Zarek's base, Ronan signaled for Mira to stop. They crouched behind a ridge, looking down at the sprawling compound below. It was a fortress of steel and ice, surrounded by armed guards and fortified walls. The central hub stood at the heart of the base, its massive thermal core glowing faintly through the snow. Zarek won't expect an attack here, Mira said, her eyes scanning the compound. He thinks he's invincible. Ronan nodded. That's his mistake. He doesn't know what we're capable of. He pulled a small device from his jacket, an old military-grade explosive he had scavenged during his time on the planet. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to cause a major distraction. We'll plant this near the outer wall, Ronan explained. When it goes off, it'll draw most of the guards away from the hub. Then we sneak in and take out the machines. Mira's eyes widened as she realized what he was planning. You're going to blow up the wall. Ronan grinned. It's a start. They moved quickly, staying low to avoid detection. The snow and ice provided cover, but they had to be careful. Zarek's men were everywhere, patrolling the perimeter with plasma rifles in hand. When they reached the outer wall, Ronan set the explosive and gave Mira a nod. Get ready. Once this goes off, we'll only have a few minutes before they realize what's happening. Mira nodded, her body tense with anticipation. Ronan pressed the detonator. The explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending a shockwave through the compound. The outer wall crumbled, and alarms blared as Zarek's men scrambled to respond. Let's go, Ronan said, grabbing Mira's arm and pulling her toward the central hub. As the guards rushed to deal with the explosion, Ronan and Mira slipped through the chaos, making their way toward the heart of Zarek's base. The central hub loomed ahead, its thermal core pulsing with energy. They were almost there. But as they reached the entrance, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Zarek. He stood there, his yellow eyes glowing with fury, his massive frame blocking their path. You really thought you could get away, human? Zarek growled, his voice dripping with malice. You're more clever than I gave you credit for, but this ends now. Ronan's heart pounded as he faced the alien warlord. The final confrontation was coming, and he knew they couldn't afford to lose. Ronan stood face to face with Zarek, the towering alien warlord who now blocked their path to the central hub. His yellow eyes blazed with fury, and a sinister grin spread across his face as he stepped forward, his massive hands flexing in anticipation. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long, human," Zarek growled, his voice like the rumble of an impending storm. "I underestimated you once, but that won't happen again." Behind him, the alarms continued to blare, and Ronan could see Zarek's men scrambling to contain the chaos caused by the explosion. But he knew they didn't have much time. The longer they stood here, the more likely they were to be overwhelmed. Mira, standing at Ronan's side, clenched her fists, her breath visible in the cold air. "Zarek, this doesn't have to end like this. Let us go, and we'll leave your base intact." Zarek chuckled darkly. "You think I'll let you walk away after all you've done? After the destruction you've caused? No, I'm going to enjoy watching you suffer." Ronan raised his plasma rifle, aiming it directly at Zarek's chest. "Then let's get this over with." Without another word, Ronan squeezed the trigger, sending a bolt of energy hurtling toward Zarek. But the alien warlord was fast, faster than Ronan had expected. With a quick movement, Zarek sidestepped the shot, the plasma bolt sizzling past him and into the wall of the central hub. "You'll have to do better than that, human," Zarek sneered, lunging forward with terrifying speed. Ronan barely had time to react before Zarek's massive hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The pressure around Ronan's neck was immense, and he struggled to breathe as Zarek's grip tightened. "Is this all your species has to offer?" Zarek taunted, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I thought you humans were supposed to be resilient." Mira, seeing Ronan in danger, sprang into action. She rushed forward, drawing a small blade from her belt, and slashed at Zarek's arm. The blade cut deep into Zarek's skin, but the alien warlord barely flinched. With a snarl, he backhanded Mira, sending her crashing into the wall of the hub with a sickening thud. Ronan's vision blurred as the lack of oxygen began to take its toll. He knew he had only seconds before Zarek crushed his windpipe completely. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, Ronan focused on his body's heat. He could feel the warmth building inside him, his core temperature rising as he forced his body into overdrive. Just as Zarek leaned in, ready to deliver the final blow, Ronan unleashed a blast of intense heat. The sudden surge of energy radiated from his body, the air around him shimmering as the temperature spiked. Zarek howled in pain, his grip loosening as the heat burned his skin. Ronan dropped to the ground, gasping for air. His body trembled from the effort of releasing so much heat at once, but he couldn't stop now. Zarek staggered back, clutching his burned arm, his eyes filled with shock and fury. You shouldn't be able to do that," Zarek snarled, his voice filled with disbelief. "No human should have that kind of power." Ronan wiped the blood from his mouth and stood, his legs shaky but determined. "You've spent too much time underestimating us, Zarek. Humans are a lot tougher than you think." Zarek's rage boiled over, and with a roar, he charged at Ronan again. But this time, Ronan was ready. He sidestepped the attack, ducking under Zarek's outstretched arm, and landed a hard kick to the back of Zarek's knee, sending the alien warlord stumbling forward. Before Zarek could recover, Ronan grabbed his plasma rifle and fired several shots into the back of Zarek's leg, the energy bolts searing through his flesh. Zarek let out a bellow of pain, collapsing to one knee. Ronan knew he had to end this now. He couldn't afford to drag out the fight any longer, especially with Zarek's men likely regrouping outside. He aimed the plasma rifle at the back of Zarek's head, his finger hovering over the trigger. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, Mira called out, her voice strained. "Wait." Ronan hesitated, glancing over at her. She was struggling to her feet, her hand pressed against her side where Zarek had struck her. "Don't kill him yet," she said, her eyes hard. "We need him to shut down the central hub. He's the only one who knows how." Zarek, still kneeling, let out a weak laugh. "You really think I'd help you, after all this? You're even more foolish than I thought." Ronan's grip tightened on the rifle. You're going to help us, Zarek, whether you like it or not." With a groan of pain, Zarek looked up at Ronan, his eyes filled with contempt. "You'll never win, human. Even if you take me down, there are more like me out there. More who will hunt you and your kind." Ronan knelt down, his voice cold and steady. "Maybe, but right now, you're going to help us, or you're going to die right here." For a long moment, Zarek said nothing, his jaw clenched in defiance. But finally, with a snarl, he nodded. "Fine, I'll help you. But know this, once this is over, I'll find you, and I'll kill you." Ronan stood, keeping the rifle trained on Zarek as he motioned for Mira to join him. Together, they dragged Zarek toward the entrance of the central hub, the massive thermal core looming just beyond the heavy doors. "We need to destroy that core," Ronan said, his voice low. "Once it's gone, Zarek's machines will be useless." Mira nodded, her eyes focused on the task ahead. "Let's get this done." As they stepped through the entrance, the temperature inside the hub rose dramatically, the heat from the thermal core radiating through the room. Zarek groaned as he was forced to his feet, his burned leg barely supporting his weight. "You're making a mistake," Zarek growled. "You think taking out the core will stop us? It won't. We'll rebuild." Ronan ignored him, his eyes locked on the core. "We'll see about that." With Zarek's reluctant help, they began the process of shutting down the machines, disabling the systems that had been draining heat from living beings. It was a slow and grueling process, but Ronan knew they had no other choice. As the final system shut down, a low hum filled the room, and the thermal core's glow began to fade. "It's done," Mira said, her voice filled with relief. "We did it." But just as the last of the core's energy faded, Zarek let out a low chuckle. "You've made a grave mistake, human." Before Ronan could react, Zarek slammed his fist into a hidden control panel, and the entire hub began to shake violently. Alarms blared, and the ground beneath them trembled as the core's shutdown triggered a catastrophic meltdown. "We need to get out of here," Mira shouted, grabbing Ronan's arm. Ronan's heart raced as the realization hit him. They had moments before the entire hub exploded. With Zarek's laugh echoing behind them, Ronan and Mira bolted for the exit, racing against time as the central hub crumbled around them. Ronan and Mira sprinted through the crumbling corridors of the central hub, the ground shaking violently beneath their feet. The walls groaned and cracked as the meltdown of the thermal core began to tear the structure apart. Dust and debris rained down from above, and the deafening roar of alarms filled the air. "This way," Ronan shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. He grabbed Mira's arm, guiding her through the narrow passageways as they navigated the collapsing facility. Every step was a race against time, and the heat from the malfunctioning core grew more intense with each passing second. Behind them, Zarek's laughter echoed through the crumbling halls, a reminder that he had set this chain of events in motion. His smug voice filled Ronan's mind, but there was no time to focus on revenge. Survival was all that mattered now. They reached the outer wall just as another violent tremor shook the building. A massive crack split the floor, sending chunks of ice and metal falling into the abyss below. Ronan cursed under his breath, glancing at the way ahead. The exit was blocked by debris. "We're trapped," Mira shouted, her voice laced with panic. Ronan scanned the area, his mind racing for a solution. They couldn't go back the way they came. The hub was falling apart too quickly. But there had to be another way out. His eyes locked onto a narrow vent on the far side of the room. It wasn't much, but it might be their only chance. "There," he pointed. "We can crawl through the vent." Mira's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That thing's barely big enough to fit a person." "It's that or we stay here and get buried alive," Ronan shot back. Without waiting for her response, Ronan rushed to the vent, pulling off the metal grating and motioning for Mira to follow. She hesitated for only a second before nodding and squeezing into the narrow space. The vent was dark and claustrophobic, the walls cold and slick with condensation. Ronan crawled behind Mira, his hands and knees scraping against the rough surface as they inched forward. The sound of the crumbling hub behind them grew more distant, but the air in the vent was thick with tension. "Do you think Zarek made it out?" Mira asked, her voice echoing in the tight space. Ronan shook his head, though she couldn't see him. "It doesn't matter. If he did, we'll deal with him later. Right now, we need to focus on getting out of here." The vent stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but finally they reached the end. A faint light filtered through the cracks in the metal, and with a grunt of effort, Ronan pushed the grating open. Cold air rushed into the vent, and the two of them crawled out into the open, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground. Ronan lay there for a moment, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. The cold bit at his skin, but it was a relief after the sweltering heat of the hub. Mira rolled onto her back beside him, her eyes closed as she sucked in deep breaths of the freezing air. "We made it," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Ronan sat up, glancing back at the central hub. In the distance, the towering structure was a crumbling ruin, its once mighty walls collapsing in on themselves. The thermal core had completely destabilized, and it was only a matter of time before the entire base was reduced to rubble. "We did," Ronan said, his voice calm but tinged with exhaustion. But even as the hub collapsed, Ronan couldn't shake the feeling that their victory was far from complete. Zarek had been right about one thing. There were more like him out there. More who saw humans as weak, exploitable, and disposable. Mira sat up, brushing snow from her clothes. "What now? Zarek's base is gone, but there are still other gangs on this planet. We're not safe yet." Ronan looked out over the frozen landscape, his mind turning. "We regroup. There's a faction of aliens I've been in contact with, prisoners, just like us, but they've managed to stay neutral in the gang wars. They'll be interested in what we've done here. If we can form an alliance, we might be able to take down the other gangs." Mira raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "You think they'll trust you? After everything?" Ronan met her gaze, his expression hard. "They don't have a choice. Zarek underestimated us, and so will the others. If they think we're weak, we'll prove them wrong. But we can't do it alone." Mira stood up, dusting herself off. "Well, it looks like you've got yourself a partner then. I'm not going back to Zarek, and I'm certainly not staying on the sidelines." Ronan smiled slightly. "Good, because we're going to need all the help we can get." The two of them started moving again, heading toward the distant mountains where Ronan's potential allies were hiding. The trek was long and grueling, the icy wind biting at their faces, but they pressed on, driven by the need for survival and something more, a spark of hope that things could change. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the landscape grew even more treacherous. Jagged cliffs loomed above them, and the snow became deeper with every step. But Ronan's mind was focused on what lay ahead. After hours of climbing, they finally reached a hidden valley nestled between the peaks. There, in the shadows of the mountains, was a small encampment, alien prisoners who had managed to carve out a life in the harsh wilderness, away from the warring factions. Smoke rose from a few scattered fires, and figures moved between the tents, their eyes wary. As Ronan and Mira approached, a figure emerged from one of the tents, a tall, thin alien with deep blue skin and large, intelligent eyes. He regarded them cautiously, his hands resting on the hilt of a blade at his waist. "Who are you?" the alien asked, his voice low but commanding. Ronan stepped forward, meeting the alien's gaze. "My name's Ronan Briggs. We're here to talk." The alien's eyes narrowed. "What could you possibly have to offer us?" Ronan straightened, his voice steady and sure. "We just took down Zarek and his entire operation. His base is nothing but rubble now, and we're not stopping there. If you want to survive on this planet, you'll need allies. You'll need us." The alien studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he nodded. "Come inside, we'll talk." As they followed the alien into the camp, Ronan exchanged a glance with Mira. They had made it this far, but the fight was far from over. The gangs that ruled this frozen prison planet wouldn't go down without a fight, and the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But for the first time in a long time, Ronan felt a spark of hope. Humans had always been underestimated, dismissed as weak by the more advanced species of the galaxy. But here, on this frozen wasteland, they would prove just how wrong the galaxy had been. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting alone. The air inside the alien encampment was tense. As Ronan and Mira sat across from the blue-skinned alien leader, the weight of the situation settled in. Around them, other members of the encampment glanced warily, some muttering in their native languages. They were a mix of different species, all survivors of the gangs that had claimed dominion over this frozen planet. Their eyes showed wariness, but also a spark of something Ronan had seen before, the will to survive. The alien leader, Irex, sat quietly for a moment, his large eyes studying Ronan and Mira with intensity. Finally, he broke the silence. "You say you've taken down Zarek," Irex said, his voice cold but curious. "That's no small feat. Zarek's forces have terrorized this sector for years. But even if what you claim is true, that leaves a power vacuum. The other gangs won't ignore that." Ronan nodded. "I know. Zarek was just the beginning. We've already crippled one of the most powerful factions on this planet. With your help, we can take down the others too, but we need to act fast before they realize what's happening." Irex's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "You're asking for an alliance, but what do you offer in return?" "We have our own way of surviving out here, and we've managed to stay out of the gang wars so far." "Staying neutral won't work for much longer," Mira interjected. "Zarek might be gone, but the other factions will move in to take his place. They'll come for you sooner or later." Ronan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "We don't just offer an alliance, we offer a chance to end this for good. The other gangs see us as weak. They think humans are easy targets, disposable. But they're wrong. We've survived worse than this, and if we work together, we can bring them down, one by one." Irex's eyes narrowed. "And what makes you think you can succeed where so many others have failed? What makes you different?" Ronan's jaw tightened. He knew what Irex was asking. It wasn't just about numbers or firepower, it was about something more fundamental. Something that had always set humans apart from the other species in the galaxy. "What makes us different?" Ronan repeated, his voice quiet but firm. "We don't give up. You've seen it yourself, haven't you? The way humans survive, even in the harshest conditions. You've heard the stories about Earth, how we rebuilt after every disaster, every war. No matter how bad things get, we keep fighting. That's what we offer. The will to survive, no matter the odds." Irex sat back, considering Ronan's words. Around them, the camp had grown quieter, the other prisoners listening intently. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fires. Finally, Irex nodded. "Very well. I'll consider your offer. But you should know, if you fail, it won't just be your life at risk. You'll bring destruction down on all of us." Ronan met his gaze. "I understand, but I'm not planning on failing." Irex stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "We'll speak again soon. Until then, rest. You'll need your strength for what's coming." As Irex walked away, Ronan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced at Mira, who was watching him with a mixture of admiration and wariness. "You really think this will work?" she asked, her voice low. Ronan shrugged. "It has to." The two of them left the central tent, stepping out into the cold night. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling clouds of ice and snow. The alien prisoners moved about the camp, their eyes still on Ronan and Mira. But there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense of hope, however faint. They found a quiet spot near one of the fires and sat down, letting the warmth seep into their tired bodies. Mira stretched her arms, wincing from the earlier fight. "You know," she said, her voice softer now, I wasn't sure about you when we first met. I didn't think you could survive out here, but you've proven me wrong." Ronan smirked, his breath visible in the cold air. "Humans are full of surprises." Mira chuckled, but then her expression grew more serious. "Zarek's gone, but there are still others out there. Even if we manage to take down the other gangs, this planet, it's not a place for humans, or anyone really." Ronan nodded, staring into the flames. "I know, but we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to make sure no one else has to go through what we've been through." Mira looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "You're talking about something bigger than just escaping this planet, aren't you?" Ronan didn't answer immediately. He hadn't spoken much about his past, but the memories of Earth, of everything he'd fought for before ending up on this frozen prison, were always with him. "There's more out there," he said quietly. "More than just surviving. More than just running from one war to the next. If we can take down the gangs, if we can show the galaxy that humans aren't weak, maybe we can build something better. Something worth fighting for." Mira studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'm with you, Ronan. Whatever comes next." Before Ronan could respond, a shout echoed through the camp. They both stood up, their instincts kicking in. A group of alien prisoners was gathering near the edge of the camp, pointing toward the mountains. "What's going on?" Ronan asked, moving toward the commotion. One of the prisoners turned to him, panic in his eyes. "Zarek's men. They're coming." Ronan's heart sank. He hadn't expected them to regroup so quickly. He exchanged a glance with Mira, and they both knew what had to be done. "Get everyone ready," Ronan said, his voice firm. "We're not going to let them take us by surprise." The camp erupted into motion, prisoners grabbing whatever weapons they could find. Ronan and Mira quickly gathered their gear, their minds racing as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. As the first figures appeared on the horizon, Zarek's remaining forces, bolstered by members of other gangs who had moved in to fill the power vacuum, Ronan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. The odds were stacked against them, but that had never stopped him before. He glanced at Mira, who was standing beside him, her face set in determination. "Ready?" Mira nodded. "Let's show them what humans are made of." As the enemy approached, Ronan raised his plasma rifle, his body already heating up in preparation for the fight ahead. He could feel the familiar warmth spreading through him, his enhanced physiology kicking in. The air around him shimmered with heat, and he knew he was ready. This was it, the final battle, the moment to prove to everyone, alien and human alike, that they were not weak, that they would not be dismissed or defeated. With a shout, Ronan led the charge, Mira at his side. Together, they plunged into the fray, their determination unshakable, their will to survive stronger than ever. And as the battle raged on, Ronan knew, deep in his heart, that this was just the beginning.